Welcome to Newsday. Reporting live from Singapore, I'm Karishma Vaswani. The headlines. Reports the Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich suffered symptoms of suspected poisoning during Russian-Ukrainian peace talks earlier this month.
It does appear that there are organophosphates, aka nerve agents, involved, and we really need to see the medical records.
Russia continues to hit targets across the country. The next round of face-to-face negotiations are expected to take place on Tuesday in Turkey. Hollywood star Will Smith says sorry for slapping comedian Chris Rock at the Oscars, admitting his behavior was unacceptable and inexcusable. And lockdown in Shanghai, China, a city of 25 million people, races to test for COVID-19 as authorities try to stamp out a worsening COVID outbreak.
Live from our studio in Singapore, this is BBC News. It's Newsday.
Hello and welcome to the programme. Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich reportedly suffered symptoms of poisoning at peace talks on the Ukraine-Belarus border earlier this month. The Chelsea Football Club owner, who's now recovered, suffered sore eyes and peeling skin, according to these reports. 2 Ukrainian peace negotiators were also said to have been affected. Here's our security correspondent, Frank Gardner.
Recent pictures of Roman Abramovich at Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion airport. But 11 days earlier, on March the 3rd, something happened to him and 2 others following peace talks on Ukraine's border with Belarus. Hours after these Russian and Ukrainian delegates met, 3 of them, including Mr. Abramovich, suffered searing pain in the eyes, dimness of vision, and inflamed reddened skin. Later that night, in the Ukrainian capital Kyiv, according to the investigative website Bellingcat, all 3 were suffering from the symptoms of intentional poisoning with a chemical agent.
It is potentially very serious, and hopefully the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons will be called in to investigate. Both the Ukraine and Russia are signatories to the Chemical Weapons Convention, so that would be within the remit of both, particularly Ukraine, to bring in.
There was no immediate comment from Moscow and no proof that Russia was behind this. But back in 2020, the Russian opposition activist Alexei Navalny was hospitalized and nearly died in Siberia after being poisoned with a nerve agent Novichok. He recovered, but Bellingcat's investigators were able to prove it was the work of Russia's Federal Security Service, the FSB. 2 years before that, the same nerve agent, Novichok, was used in an attempt to murder the former KGB officer, Sergei Skripal, in the town of Salisbury. He was saved by an antidote, atropine. Roman Abramovich's associates say he's fine now, and he intends to continue trying to broker a peace between his native Russia and Ukraine. It's thought that whoever poisoned him and the other delegates was looking to sabotage those peace talks by sending a sinister warning. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Well, peace talks are expected to resume on Tuesday in Turkey. And just ahead of them, Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky has made an offer to Russia. He said his country could adopt the status of neutrality if that would help end the war, though it would have to be agreed upon in a referendum. Now, on the battlefield, Russian advances have stalled recently. This map shows the areas of Ukraine currently under Russian control. Russian troops still haven't been able to encircle the capital, Kyiv. The closest they are is about 15 miles away. Elsewhere, Ukraine has set up humanitarian corridors to evacuate civilians, but some of those corridors haven't opened yet because of fears Russian forces might attack people who are fleeing. Our next report is from Jeremy Bowen. I want to warn you that his report from Kyiv contains some distressing images.
The Russians attacked an oil storage depot in western Ukraine. The war is settling into a deadly daily grind. Medics live and sleep at the hospitals. There's no time to get home. In one in Kyiv, the patients include a Ukrainian diplomat. Victoria said it was ironic that she was wounded in her own home when she came back from Belarus, Russia's ally. But I won't lie, she said, I'm very scared. Gennadi's home was also hit. The Russians thought they'd be greeted with hugs, he says. But if we don't get weapons to take the offensive, missiles and planes, the war's going to drag on for a long time. President Zelensky hinted at compromise to Russian journalists on Ukrainian neutrality and territory.
I understand. It's impossible to force Russia completely from the Ukrainian territory. It would lead to the Third World War. I understand it, and that is why I'm talking about a compromise.
In Kyiv, a few cafes are open and it's less tense than a month ago. Slava and Katerina were intrigued by what the president had said.
Nobody is saying we should give up the territories, but there should be some compromise or concession.
We hope that Putin is a sane person, but it's a very small hope.
But at the end of the lonely roads out to the frontline towns, the war feels much closer. In Borispil, facing the Russians to the east, people risk a trip to the market. But the mayor shows off his Ukrainian-made assault rifle and says that NATO's only choice is to give them the planes and the tanks they need to beat the Russians.
I think if Putin wins this war, they don't stop. Next will be Poland, maybe Romanian, Bulgarian, and other country in European Union. I think.
Biden and some of the other leaders have said that if they intervened in the war, if there was a no-fly zone, it could be World War III.
Maybe. But if they don't close the sky, they will be next.
Ukraine's president was right to talk about compromise, but it may never happen. Ceasefire agreements that work generally require either two sides fighting each other to exhaustion, or the weaker side making concessions because it fears defeat, or an outside intervention. None of those conditions applies in Ukraine at the moment. So the most likely option is a continuation of a war of attrition. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Kyiv.
Well, away from Ukraine, I want to tell you about how the Hollywood actor Will Smith has apologized to Chris Rock for slapping him during the Oscar ceremony on Sunday night. In a statement posted on his Instagram account, he describes his behavior as unacceptable and inexcusable and said he deeply regretted his actions. Well, we can speak to our North America correspondent, David Willis, now, who's been looking into this story for us and following it very closely. David, great to get you on the program. You know, this statement on Instagram coming in from Will Smith just in the last half an hour or so, how surprised, or were you surprised, I should say, by the fact that he's made this decision to apologize after that shocking incident?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, Karishma, because in that very tearful acceptance speech last night, Chris Rock apologised to his fellow nominees, he apologised to the Academy, but he didn't apologise to Chris Rock. Well, now he has done so, a fulsome apology, as you say, on Instagram. I'll read you a little bit of it. He says, violence in all of its forms is poisonous and destructive. My behaviour at last night's Academy Awards was unacceptable and inexcusable. Jokes at my expense are a part of the job, he says, but a joke about Jada, that's his wife, Jada Pinkett Smith's medical condition was too much for me to bear and I reacted emotionally. I would like to publicly apologise to you, Chris. Now, this follows news earlier today that the Academy is looking into this incident and formally condemned it in public a few hours ago. And I think it's a major test now for the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences as to how they deal with this. They have really very limited scope here. They could censure, they could expel Will Smith, but it's very unlikely that he will have to forfeit the Best Actor Oscar that he picked up last night, only a few minutes, of course, after that terrible incident involving Chris Rock. So it leaves something of a dilemma for the Academy, I think, because there are a lot of people who believe that such a violent incident in a public platform such as that really shouldn't be allowed to go unpunished.
Indeed, David, and when you look at some of the commentary that's been coming out about this, it really does seem very divided, doesn't it? But I was particularly struck by Will Smith's acceptance speech on the night of the Oscars. I'm sure you were watching as well. And when he talked about the fact that Denzel Washington, a fellow actor, had sort of counseled him and quoted for him, saying that at your highest moment, be careful. That's when the devil comes for you. Now, with this apology, do you think there's a sort of sense of redemption for Will Smith in all of this? Can he make his way back?
I think he was definitely trying to explain his actions, Chris. He said as well, didn't he, love takes many forms, or something along those lines. An attempt, I think, to explain away his actions as well as a result of the public pressure that had been placed upon him. But this was a very public assault, physical and then verbal, of course, because he went back to his seat and continued to mouth obscenities at Chris Rock, to the absolute horror of people both in the theatre and viewing the award show from on television around the world. And as I say, it does leave officials, Academy officials here, in a very awkward position. The Academy, of course, has gone through some upheaval in recent years over its ethnic mix and other things, and now is having to face this very public embarrassment, if you like, and it's involving, of course, one of the key names in Hollywood, somebody that normally they would go out of their way to avoid upsetting.
David Willis, always fantastic to get you on the programme. Thanks so much for joining us on Newsday with your thoughts. Meanwhile, in other stories for you today, the BBC understands that the first fines for breaches of COVID-19 rules, which are part of a police investigation into the UK government lockdown parties, could be issued as soon as Tuesday. The Metropolitan Police investigation into 12 events held across government was launched in late January. Our correspondent David Wallace-Lockhart has more.
So to set some of the context, before the war in Ukraine, politics in the UK, all the talk of Westminster was really dominated by what came to be known as Partygate. And those were the parties held at Downing Street in Whitehall, around government buildings, while the UK was under strict COVID restrictions. And it all looks likely to be thrust into the limelight once again, because Westminster sources are telling the BBC that the first fixed penalty notices, essentially fines for breaching rules, are expected to be announced tomorrow, at least 15 of those expected. There was an internal report by a civil servant called Sue Gray, and she looked at 16 events that had taken place between May 2020 and April 2021 while COVID rules were in place, and she concluded that rules had been broken. She was very critical of the culture taking place in government at the time, and we then know that the Metropolitan Police went on to look at 12 of those events. Now, at least 3 of them were attended by the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, though he denies breaking the rules at any points. Over 100 questionnaires sent out to people who were thought to be involved to try and ascertain what happened, what rules may have been broken. Boris Johnson always previously said he believed he was following the rules, but he did apologise in January for attending what was known as a bring your own booze party at the Downing Street Gardens last year, the first COVID lockdown was in place, and he apologised for that. Downing Street has always said that they will be open and they will announce it if the Prime Minister himself receives a fine. But at this point, it's important to stress we don't know who is going to be part of these fixed penalty notices announced tomorrow. We don't know what events they will relate to. Now, the pressure on this issue had perhaps eased in recent weeks with the war in Ukraine taking up a lot of political oxygen, some of Boris Johnson's own MPs easing off their calls for him to go. This is likely to bring it back into the limelight somewhat.
David Wallace-Lockhart there reporting on that story for us. Well, millions of people in eastern Shanghai spent Monday sealed in their homes, waiting to be tested as the authorities try to stamp out a worsening COVID outbreak. In the western half of the city, people cleared shops and markets of supplies ahead of a lockdown there, which starts on Friday. In the last few minutes, the city authorities have reported a record 4,000 new cases of coronavirus in the past day. Our China correspondent Stephen McDonnell has more.
Panic buying led to fights as Shanghai's 25 million residents prepared to go into lockdown. From today, the east side of the financial capital is a ghost town. The west side will follow on Friday. Across China, daily COVID tests are mostly orderly, but at times chaotic. In the third year of this crisis, the government's complete elimination strategy is under huge strain, with signs of pandemic exhaustion. Those who break the rules are being taken away by the police. Some are forced to make public confessions. Here, a woman pleads to be allowed to leave home so her husband can receive urgent cancer treatment. From the northeast to the south, tens of millions of people are now confined to their homes.
Beijing as a city is not under lockdown, but if you live in this compound right now, you can't leave. That's because there's been a case here. Now, these are the deliveries of food and other provisions. You can see they're marked up according to the flat number, and the staff here will take these provisions and deliver them to people, and that way everybody can stay inside for the next 2 weeks.
In Hong Kong, 6,000 mostly elderly, non-vaccinated people died in 2 months. Yet it's thought that nearly half the population was infected, boosting herd immunity.
China, by learning from the mistakes that Hong Kong have made, they will be upscaling the vaccination, especially among the elderly.
On the mainland, officials say the vaccine booster rate for those over 80 is at only 19.7%. One 85-year-old tells us she and her husband have only just been vaccinated.
I'm not worried. We just need to be careful.
Chinese people do what they are told. They listen to the government.
Yet it's hard for the party to shift when it's making political mileage attacking other countries for sacrificing lives by opening up.
If we chose to lay down now, our efforts will have come to nothing. We unswervingly insist on zero COVID.
Blue fences mark communities under strict isolation. The world's COVID emergency started here. It looks like this will be the last country to emerge from it. Stephen McDonnell, BBC News, Beijing.
Well, if you want to get in touch with me about any of the stories that you've seen so far on Newsday, I'm on Twitter at BBC Karishma. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the programme, a balance of power. Ukrainian troops enjoy some success in recent days, pushing back Russian forces.
The accident that happened here was of the sort that can at worst produce a meltdown. In this case, the precautions worked, but they didn't work quite well enough to prevent some old fears about the safety features of these stations from resurfacing.
The Republic of Ireland has become the first country in the world to ban smoking in the workplace. From today, anyone lighting up in offices, businesses, pubs and restaurants will face a heavy fine.
The president was on his way out of the Washington Hilton Hotel where he had been addressing a trade union conference. The small crowd outside included his assailant.
It has become a symbol of Paris. 100 years ago, many Parisians wished it had never been built. The Eiffel Tower's birthday is being marked by a reenactment of the first ascent by Gustave Eiffel.
This is Newsday on the BBC. I'm Karishma Vaswani in Singapore. Our headlines for you today. The Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich is reported to have suffered symptoms of suspected poisoning during Russian-Ukrainian peace talks earlier this month. Russia continues to hit targets in all parts of the country. The next round of face-to-face negotiations take place on Tuesday in Turkey. Well, against that backdrop in Ukraine, the White House has had to row back comments from President Biden that he made on Saturday in Warsaw, that President Putin cannot remain in power. Earlier, he was asked to clarify what he meant by those comments.
It means that I would hope I just was expressing my outrage. He shouldn't remain in power. Just like, you know, bad people shouldn't continue to do bad things. But it doesn't mean we have a fundamental policy to do anything to take Putin down in any way.
Joe Biden speaking there. Meanwhile, in the south of Ukraine, Ukrainian forces have had some success in recent days pushing back Russian troops, raising doubts over whether the Kremlin will still try to seize control of the whole coastline. In the strategic port city of Odessa, the immediate fear of Russian bombardment has, for the time being, eased. Our correspondent Andrew Harding sent this report.
Somewhere out there is the Russian Navy. And on Ukraine's Black Sea coast, no one is letting down their guard. We've had a lot of incoming fire, rockets, bombs, says Anatoly. And with them, the fear of an amphibious landing. And yet, in the nearby port city of Odessa, clubs and restaurants are reopening. Not exactly packed yet, but the mood here appears to be easing.
The city is coming alive. I feel something like this.
Why is that?
I don't know. I think the fear is go away a little bit.
People think that Odessa won't be attacked?
I think yes.
And here's why he may be right. Along the Black Sea coast, Russian hardware and Russian plans lie in ruins. The Kremlin's advance here has stalled or even been pushed back. Which may explain these tense scenes in Kherson, a frontline city occupied by the Russians. But they're having growing trouble controlling it.
When they started using this gas, smoke pellets and stun grenades, so I started running. Since they are using more threatening techniques and tactics, I think they are in panic.
Panic or not, back in Odessa, Ukrainians are still preparing for a Russian attack from land, sea or air.
But what if this war is edging towards some kind of a stalemate? Of course, anything is still possible, but here in the south, Ukrainians increasingly are looking for reasons to be hopeful, maybe even confident.
A guide takes us down into Odessa's ancient catacombs. These vast tunnels once helped families shelter from the Nazis.
There's some graffiti here from the 1940s. It reads, "Hitler go, death to fascism."
Now, the past and present seem to mingle in the musty air. And yet, from its catacombs to its clubs, today's Odessa is embracing optimism, as if that alone were a form of defiance against the Kremlin. Andrew Harding, BBC News in southern Ukraine.
And a reminder of our live page on BBC News Online, which has updates as they happen on events in Ukraine, including that top headline, of course, about that possible poisoning. But you can get all the latest from inside the country, from our correspondents and our teams on the ground. That's on the BBC website, or download the BBC News app. And finally, I want to bring you this story about the winner of the BBC Indian Sportswoman of the Year. It's just been announced at an awards ceremony in the Indian capital, Delhi. The winner, Olympian Mirabai Chanu is India's first silver medalist in weightlifting. She's from rural northeast India, from the state of Manipur, where she would carry firewood and water on her shoulders from hills to her home. Her journey is rather remarkable. Well, I'm afraid we've had some difficulties trying to get you that.
उसी टाइम में हम हिल से लकड़ी लेके और नदी में जाके पानी ले उठा के लेके आना वो सब करते थे। बहुत कम खाना मिलते थे, हफ्ते में 2-3 बार ही म्यूजिक खाते थे, मिलते थे। लड़की बहुत कुछ कर सकती है, कोई कमी नहीं है लड़कों से। सब बोलती है ना वेट लिफ्टिंग में लड़की नहीं कर सकती, बॉडी खराब होगी, बहुत सुना है मैंने। ऐसा कुछ नहीं है, सेम ही रहेगी, मैं भी ऐसे ही हूँ।
That's it from us. Thanks so much for watching. Do stay with BBC News.